Okay, we will get started, even though we don't have many in. So, as people come in, try to be accommodating, but definitely let them know they're late. Okay. One of the other things, I was talking to Don about whether we were going to do class or not, and he said, let's do it so we don't get off schedule. So we're going to try and go pretty close to the 11 o'clock hour here. But I'm going to try and move fast also, so we'll see how we're going to get in. What I want to cover this morning is Saul and the kingdom of Israel. And look at that. The lesson reading today was really about this idea of why Saul is rejected as king of Israel. And I want to kind of open that up a little bit more and look at the broader context of what's taking place here and why Saul is such an important person and actually what he accomplishes in the history of Israel. So, we need a little bit of background first. Some of this we've already covered. We've talked about how Samuel was the last judge of Israel. So Samuel represents sort of the leadership under Moses, Joshua, the period of judges. And Samuel is the last judge. He will actually die during today's Sunday school lesson. So he's a transition person. Second thing is Israel is shifting from a tribal to a kingdom, economy, culture, state. So Israel is in a huge state of change during this period of time. Saul is the complement to Samuel. Saul represents the first king of Israel, so he's the first in this new line. And then finally, we also have the idea that Israel is competing with other nations for the land. We were talking last week about how Israel is growing, but at the same time you've got the Philistines who have emigrated in from the Aegean Islands. They're there, and you've got the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Amalekites. There's a lot of other nations in this area, and they seem to be growing as well, and so there's competition for land, resources, and stuff like this, and Israel finds itself in the middle of this. The second thing that I want to kind of talk about here is this is the end of the Bronze Age, and we're moving into the Iron Age. And this brings about incredible changes at a international, really a global level. But in particular, in our region here, there's two things we need to look at. In the north, in the purple, this is the Hittite Empire. And the south, in the red, the shade of the red, this is the Egyptian Empire. Up to about 1200, 1100 BC, these were the dominant empires in the world, or in this region of the world, north and south. And Israel is a little strip of land in between the two with the major highways running north-south through it. Oh, I don't have the highways on there. And so they're always at the mercy of one of these empires. What happens as we go from the Bronze into the Iron Age is that these empires really diminish. They collapse. The Hittites, probably because of the Philistines, with the explosion of Thera, which becomes Santorini, and the dispersion of the Minoan population, it really looks like the Hittite Empire is destroyed and is greatly reduced. The Egyptian Empire really reduces at this time also. What this means is the old saying of, when the cat's away, the mice will play, is really true. With no major superpowers on the scene, these little nations like the Philistines, the Moabites, the Israelites, they now get to flex their muscle and try and accomplish some things. The other thing is, technology-wise, we're moving from the Bronze to the Iron Age. Up until this time, they could make weapons out of bronze because tin melts around 400 degrees, copper melts around 1,000 degrees, and so even a potter's kiln could be used for making bronze weapons. However, to move over to iron, they could smelt down some iron at that temperature, but really iron turned out to be heavier and not as strong as the bronze, this compound of tin and copper. And so iron weapons to this time really weren't that great. But once they learned how to make reducing kilns, where they reduced the amount of oxygen in there, they increased the heat, now they could smelt iron at 3,500 degrees. They could make iron that was tempered. It had a lower carbon compound. They could remove more impurities to it. And then they could make it a lot stronger. They could quench and temper it as well. The result is that these are brass swords from around 1600 BC. And unfortunately, the iron ones don't stand up well. They rust. So they're not quite as good as the bronze ones that way. But this is a reconstruction of the type. This is a Greek xiphos sword. This is the type of sword that became really prevalent, smelted out of iron. What it means is if you go into battle and somebody has an iron sword and you have a brass sword, and you go to clash weapons with them, the iron sword is going to cut through yours. And so iron is really a huge advancement. It's stronger. It keeps its blade better. It's more resistant to breaking in battle. It can cut through other weapons. So it's this huge advancement in technology that takes place. Now this is important because if you read the text of the story of Samuel and Saul and then even David, one of the things you'll keep hearing over and over is this mention of this little tribe called the Kenites. And you go, why are they so important? Like in the story of Deborah, when she goes out to battle Caesarea, and you know how Jael then kills Caesarea. Jael and her husband, they were Kenites. They're not Israelites, they're this other little tribe. And even in this story, when Saul goes down and attacks the Amalekites, there's some Kenites down there with the Amalekites. And Saul tells them, leave, separate yourself, go somewhere else, because we're going to attack the Amalekites. And you go, how come all this attention to the Kenites? Well, the Canaanites were metal workers. And so they were incredibly important. Whoever had good relationships with the Kenites had access to the highest technology of that day. But up until Saul, what we find is that Israel does not have access to iron working. And they also don't have great access to bronze working. In fact, we're told that when Saul has just become king, it says that none of the men of Israel had swords. And then we're also told a little bit later on, let me see if I've got, I had it up there. I've got it up here. 1 Samuel 13:9, it says, a blacksmith could not be found in all of Israel. Now, when they talk about a blacksmith here, they're not talking about somebody who's working bronze. They're talking about somebody who's working iron. A blacksmith could not be found in all of Israel, for the Philistines said, this will prevent the Hebrews from making swords and spears. So you can see that there's definitely a capturing of the technology that's available during that day. The Philistines have iron, and the Israelites do not have iron. The other thing that the Philistines have is they have chariots. They picked this up either from the Hittites or the Egyptians. This is a picture of Ramses II, in a chariot doing battle. And if you're in an area that has open fields and is sort of level, the chariot then becomes the dominant piece of military hardware that you have on the field. They move fast, they can zip in and out, they can overrun troops. This is just a huge advance. And this particular one here is interesting because here you have Ramses on his chariot, and they would actually shoot their arrows from the chariot as they're riding along. The bed of the chariot was actually kind of like suspended like a trampoline. So even as they're moving really fast, like a full suspension mountain bike, they're able to stand back there and have a stable platform by which then to shoot out. So here you are on foot, and someone comes zipping along at 20 to 30 miles an hour in one of these things, shooting arrows as they go. Now, what's kind of interesting about this one that's cool is Ramses actually has the reins of the horses tied around his waist. And there's stories of great warriors doing this. But usually you would have two people, a driver and then the person shooting in the chariot. But this one is probably intended to show just how great Ramses is as a warrior in all this. He probably didn't do it like that himself. And so it's not going to be until David and really until Solomon that Israel now has chariots incorporated into its military. So during Samuel and then Saul's day, they were a huge disadvantage to the other nations. When we talk about Saul's reign, the other thing to realize about Saul's reign is we're told a lot about his battles and we're told a lot about his encounters with Samuel, but we don't have a lot about where he builds his headquarters, what his relationships with other advisors are like. We get a very abbreviated story of Saul, and so you have to kind of pick up little clues through the story to figure out what his kingdom was like. But a couple of things we can pick up. One is in 1 Samuel chapter 13, we're told that Saul was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. The problem with that 40 years there, the 30 were a little bit more short. The 40, that's just a horrible translation. What they did is in the King James, they took a passage from the book of Acts that said that Saul reigned for 40 years, and they take that number and they stick it here. Because in the Hebrew text, it just says, and he ruled for, and then it just has the number 2 years. And you kind of look at that and you go, what's going on here? And then also when you start looking at the manuscripts, you start realizing that that number 2 seems to be like some sort of correction or a smudge or something that went in there. It's just not great. And so what people speculate is the 2 might be half of another word. So it could be 12, it could be 22, it could be 32, it could be 20, somewhere along these lines. But probably to say that he only reigned for 2 years and you read all the stories about him, that you just can't do it. So most people speculate that probably 22 or 32 is the best way to look at this. It fits with the story overall. So it means that Saul reigns for, well, let's just go with 22 years as kind of a speculation. But one of the problems is this is one of the points in our text where we actually kind of go to look at a number and you kind of go, somebody somewhere down the line botched this, or a little worm got into the manuscript and decided that that was a really chewy part of the manuscript to eat. I really like that. Let's see. Okay, the second thing that's important about Saul's reign that we have is in 1 Samuel 16:14. It says, now the Spirit of the Lord turned away from Saul, and an evil spirit of the Lord tormented him. This is right after David gets anointed as king. Samuel is having a lot of conflicts with Saul, and God tells him to go out and anoint David as king. And as soon as David is anointed as king, you get this comment about Saul, that the Spirit of God leaves or turns away from Saul, and an evil spirit comes and torments him. And this really divides Saul's reign into 2 periods. One, a good period where the Spirit of God is working with him. And another, the decline of his kingdom, when an evil spirit of the Lord is tormenting him. And so you can kind of divide his reign that way. Oh, my goodness. Let's kind of look at the overview of Saul's reign here and what takes place. The first thing is, Samuel, remember the people ask Saul for a king. Saul says, okay. And so he picks out Saul, but he isn't publicly acclaimed as king yet. And what happens is a battle at a place called Jabesh Gilead. And what takes place here is the Ammonites come and they raid Jabesh Gilead. And when Saul finds out about this, he raises up a force to go out and rescue the people. And so the story talks about how Nahash the Ammonite marched against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh Gilead said to Nahash, make a treaty with us and we will serve you. So the Israelites are saying, we'll serve this foreign king, just, don't kill us all. And Nahash the Ammonite said to them, the only way I will make a treaty with you is if you let me gouge out the right eye of every one of you, and in so doing humiliate all of Israel. So it's this threat or this what the actual treaty is here, that I will gouge out everyone's right eye, and that's the only way I'll make a treaty with you. Saul hears about this, gets angry. He goes out, and then he slaughters 2 oxen, sends them out to all the people, and says, anybody who doesn't go out and fight Jabesh Gilead with me, I'm going to do the same to all your animals as I did to these 2 oxen. And so all Israel goes out. They launch a 3-pronged attack against the Ammonite army and drive them back. And so this is Saul's first victory. And after he wins the battle there and saves the city of Jabesh Gilead, then all the people say to Samuel, make Saul our king. And so they come back down to near Jericho to a place called Gilgal, and here all of Israel coronates, or they make their covenant with Saul as their king. So now Saul is enthroned as king, and his first real test was the battle of Jabesh Gilead. That's going to become important here in a second. The second thing that happens here is Saul and his troops are now camped out down there by Jericho. It looks like he takes this ancient stronghold of Jericho, and he kind of makes it his capital for the time being. He's got about 3,000 men down there with him. The Philistines, the guys down there on the coastal plain, hear about this, and they send up an expeditionary force to the region of Jerusalem. Saul's son Jonathan hears about this, goes up and attacks them. And when he attacks them, he routs them. And 2 things happen. One, they make the Philistines really angry. The second thing is all of Israel realizes that we've made the Philistines really angry. And so they go off hiding. Saul loses most of his forces. They go hiding, and the Philistines then come up to the region of Jerusalem. And so what happens here, the Philistines come up in the red. Saul and his forces then have to come up from the region of Jericho. They camp out in this right outside Jerusalem there. And you have the story of Jonathan, his son, once again coming to the rescue. And the Philistines are on the other side of one of these ravines. Israelites are on the south side. And Jonathan takes a few of his men and says, let's go over there and see what these Philistines are really made out of. And so they climb down the ravine, and when they're climbing up the other ravine, the Philistines see them climbing up, and they said, hey, you crazy Israelites, come on up here so we can have some fun with you. And Jonathan told his armor bearer that if they say this to us, we know that God has delivered them into our hands. And so when they say this, Jonathan goes, wow, this is an act of God. He goes up there and he kills like 20 guys in a small skirmish. And the Philistines are really shaken by this. They don't know what to do. And so they're trembling with fear, and they're scared. Israel hears about it, and so they swarm around. They come over, and they attack the Philistines, and they're able to drive them back. And instead of fleeing back to the north, they flee south back to their towns. And we're told that Israel pursued the Philistines all the way down to Abishon. And the only reason why they stopped is Saul said, anybody who eats or drinks during this battle will be put to death. And so it becomes nighttime. The only person who has eaten and drunk is his son, Jonathan, during this battle. You can read the whole story there. But basically, they bunked. They've run out of all energy, and they have to stop. But they routed the Philistines back out of the hill country. The result is that now Saul controls the region of Jabesh Gilead. He controls down by Jericho, and now he controls the hill country up by Jerusalem as well. Let me see. Yep, we're still talking about this battle. An overview of Saul's military career. You get a couple summary statements. Chapter 14, verses 47 through 48, has got a great summary. It says, after Saul secured the royal position over Israel, he fought against all the enemies on all sides. The Moabites, so down here in the southeast, the Ammonites, they're the guys that attacked Jabesh Gilead, the Edomites down south of the Dead Sea, the Philistines down there on the coastal plains, and the Amalekites, who seem to be this roving tribe down there in the Negev region in the south of Israel. So what this summary statement does for us is it really shows how Saul is fighting against all the kingdoms on all sides. And the result is that he is then securing a land for Israel. So when we kind of look at the possible land that he has secured here, it's sort of in the purple here. And as I was telling you, we have to kind of get the clues for where all this is going. Nowhere in the text are we told this is what Saul controlled. But when Saul dies, David's made king, but also Saul's son is also, one of his sons is made king also. And it's in the records for what his son received as the kingdom that we get sort of this map. It said that Ishbosheth, he was appointed king over Gilead, the Gershonites, Jezreel, Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. And that's kind of where those tribes were at that time. But you see how Saul basically took these isolated bands, these isolated tribes up in the hill country, consolidated them, captured land, but also fought off the enemies on all sides. So he does a lot as far as establishing the kingdom, getting the land, and moving Israel from a tribal setup of 12 tribes that are kind of loosely associated with each other over to a national kingdom rallying around a king. The last battle I want to talk about here is the Battle of Gilboa. This is the one where Saul dies. Now, this one's kind of complicated in what takes place. First off, we're told that the Philistines have come up. So in the first red arrow, they come up. At the very northern tip of that red arrow, they camp at a place called Shuman. And they've gone up to that region because this is the valley of Jezreel. You've got this wide open valley there. And so why do you think, if they're going to make an invasion and try and take some of Israel, why do they go up to that valley? What do they got? Chariots, yeah. So they're not going to go up to Jerusalem or Samaria or someplace like this, which is rocky, rugged, hilly, because their technology won't work there. But if they go up to one of these broad valleys that cut east to west across Israel, that's where they've got the advantage. So they go up there. Saul then leaves. He's now up by Jerusalem. That's where his capital is. Goes up north, and he camps at the region of Gilboa. At the very start of this battle, we are told that Samuel died, and all Israel lamented for him. So immediately you go, uh-oh, this story's not starting on a good tone. It just faded out. It's probably on a timer. Come on. Yeah, I'm out of time, right? Come on. Yeah, this cheap Wi-Fi. Who's in charge of technology around here? Oh, okay. So Saul hears about that. He goes up to Gilboa. We're told that Samuel dies. And even though Saul and Samuel are probably at the low point of their relationship now, Samuel has really rejected Saul as king. He goes up there to the battle. And you get this funny story where Saul is terrified of the Philistines. He realizes they have iron swords, they've got iron chariots, we're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so he finds out that there's this medium over in the city or the town of Endor. And so he goes over to consult her, and you get this whole story. Saul's killed all the mediums. He's killed off all these people who practice this divination. I can't do this for you. And he's like, no, nothing's going to happen. Who do you want to talk to? I want to talk to Samuel. So she calls him up, and Samuel appears, and you get this. She screams out in terror. And it's one of these stories where you just go, the Bible's got some really funny parts at times, because here you have this medium, but when she actually does what she says she can do, she screams out in terror like, oh my God, it worked. Look what happened here. And basically you got Samuel telling Saul that he's going to die in the battle during this. Saul does die. Let me bring it up. And in the battle, not only does Saul die, but all except for one of his sons, Ishbosheth, who we talked about earlier, is killed in the battle. Now, after the battle, the Philistines take his armor and all of his possessions, and they take it back to their cities, and they show sort of the treasures from the battle they got. And they take Saul's body, they behead him, and they nail his body up to the walls of the town of Gilboa, kind of as like a crucifixion, but as a way to humiliate him. You know, they nail him up naked there for all the Israelites to see. You think your king's so great, you think you can stand up against us? Look what we do to people like this. Now, what's interesting in this whole story is across the Jordan River, you got this town, Jabesh Gilead. And what do? The men of the city rally. They go over, they fight off the Philistines in a small area. They take down the body of Saul, bring it back to Jabesh Gilead, and they burn it there. And the way the story is told is like a story out of Homer. It's this very epic rescuing the king. They burn his body, and they do this great honor for him. So you have this, just as his kingdom began with rescuing Jabesh Gilead, you've got the ending of the story where the people of Jabesh Gilead go, okay, you may not be the most popular king of Israel right now, you just died in battle, but you rescued us and we're going to stay faithful to you. And they go over and they pull him back. Let me move on here. I know. There's just a couple of things I want to talk about right here at the very end. And that out of this story, there's a lot of theological development that comes out of this whole story into the New Testament. First off, the use of the term Christ in Greek, or Messiah out of the Hebrew, means anointed one. And this comes out of the stories of when Samuel chooses Saul, and then Samuel picks David, and he anoints them to be the leader of Israel. So in the New Testament, when we have the term Christ or Messiah, it's coming out of these stories. Second thing is leadership in the Spirit of God. Saul is a classic example of when the Spirit of God was with him, good leadership. When the Spirit of God was against him, horrible leadership. And so in the New Testament, this whole idea of the leadership and the Spirit of God is very important. Third idea, Jesus as king. In the New Testament, Jesus is portrayed as king. Pilate, when he's questioning Jesus, are you the king of Israel? This whole idea of Jesus as king comes out of this period of Israel with Saul and then David. Who is the king? Who is the promised king? Who is the anointed king with the Spirit of God resting about? And then finally, the whole idea of the kingdom of God. What is the kingdom of God? These are all concepts and metaphors that come out of this story that can then get picked up in the New Testament. And so I'm going to close there because I've gone over by 2 minutes. And so I figure if Don went over with the service by a half hour, I could go over by 2 minutes. So.